I mean, to me, it looks more like an episode of The Twilight Zone than maybe an actual family. But I don't know. Maybe can anyone relate to this? I think my family is as detached from this as could be humanly possible. Not that we did it the right way in my family of origin, but whatever. I don't know. Anything? What sticks out to you? I know I paused it a couple times, making some things. Yeah.
I feel like everything's so formal and like, I don't know.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's the first thing is everything. I mean, eating with your family is cool. I mean, just out of sheer curiosity, how many of you did have on a regular basis dinner with your family? I think we did. So and we still do at home. It doesn't look anything like this. Why don't the boys have to change their clothes? Maybe they don't owe it to the women of the family to change anything else other than the glaringly obvious. Does anyone, well, this has a name. Does anyone know the name of this type of family that's being broadcast and saying, here's how you should do it? Because it does have a name, and this is where we'll start. So we'll call this Family Development 101, this whole section that we're doing. Imagine a chapter that doesn't exist inside your book. That's what we'll call it. So this does have a name, and I'm not starting in order. Sorry. The nuclear family. What used to be broadcast in our country was something called the nuclear family. And by broadcast, I simply mean you were literally told as a young person that this is the right way to do it. How would you, there's a definition for a nuclear family, which is one of many options that we have today in the year 2021 about creating our own family. How would you define it? You probably heard it before, like the nuclear family. There's a couple aspects to it. Everyone, if you scream, I can't hear, I can't understand. Well, I'll get you started. So number one, the first definition, the first aspect of a nuclear family is we have a husband and we have a wife who are married and they have procreated. They've created life. They have children living in the same household. So that's number one. The nuclear family means a husband and a wife married with children all living in the same household. Okay, well, that sounds pretty normal. But there's another part of defining a nuclear family that was also displayed in this, and that is the male, the husband, is the sole breadwinner of the family. And it's the mother's role to stay home and care for the children. That's what a nuclear family is. Is there anything wrong with having a nuclear family? Absolutely not. Why would there be? So this isn't like some kind of value judgment, like, oh, this is silly and bad and horrible. No, if a nuclear family is what you have and that's your goal, awesome. I'm happy for you. The problem is, though, when what we used to do decades ago, communicating to people that this is the way that it has to be. This is what your family is supposed to look like. In fact, another aspect of that film that's not on that 10-minute clip that they show you for free on YouTube is they also instructed you as students that if you veer from this, you're opening the door to all sorts of problems, psychological, depression, anxiety, suicide, et cetera, having that nuclear family intact was a key to your mental health. I mean, and now you know that, if you didn't know, pleasant, unemotional conversation aids in the digestive process. Who would have thought, right? So, all right, so we got the nuclear family. Does the nuclear family still exist in the United States? Absolutely. It's still out there. But if you consider, let's say we went door to door to every single family, and we create like a pie chart. What percentage of families in the U.S. would you guess today are actually nuclear families? Because they're not extinct. They are still out there. But it's kind of like going on a safari. You have to change again. You wouldn't like that. But I'm like an auctioneer. If I see even a slight movement, I get excited because someone's going to participate. Well, now you have to guess.
I'll say 45.
Wow, it's much lower than that. Yeah, 6%. Only about 6% of our family. So it's a very, very tiny piece of the pie. I don't even know, this is not to scale, but that's our nuclear family. Now that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of husbands and wives living with their kids. It's that second aspect that kills it, right? I don't even, to be honest, maybe you could talk to your parents. I don't know how. I mean, I guess if you have a really lucrative job, I don't know how there's just one breadwinner in a house at all. I don't know how that's even possible in 2021, but it is. I'm sure it is, and I'm sure it happens. But you can see it only happens about 6% of the time. What would you guess? Now we're up to the first point. What is today in 2021 the most common household? That doesn't mean it makes up over 50%. So we're not talking about the majority, but what I mean by household is the makeup of it. If you go in, who do you see and how are the people that are in that house related? If you went to every apartment, every condo, every house, what would you see most commonly? Again, it's not going to make up 50%, but what's our biggest piece today? You think of all the different combinations, right? Any guesses? Yeah.
Maybe like divorce.
It's a good guess. Maybe we've got a divorced family, right? It's not correct, but at least you tried. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Blended family.
What do you mean by a blended family?
Like when a family like has like a mom and dad has kids from a separate marriage and then they
Also bringing them together. Well, if I reach my goal, we'll actually talk about that today. Another good guess. It's bigger than the nuclear family. The most common household is a married couple with no children. In 2021, that's what you would see the most common. Married couple with absolutely no kids. You don't need to write this down. Out of curiosity, how many of you do want kids someday? I know now I'm asking a personal question. I'm raising my hand, thankfully. Yes, I've had two. I'm done. But how many would you like to have? Four. I said, you'll understand why I said four like that. What did you say?
I want to have
Four? Two. Five. Wow. Good for you guys. You know what the most common answer is? It's one. Yeah, when we ask married people, how many kids would you like to have? They say one. I think I said this in the description. I'm not sure if I did or not. I think I mentioned, I asked you to talk about your family of origin. I'll say this probably 5 times today. And by the way, what does family of origin mean? I don't want to pretend everyone knows what that means.
like your mom and dad.
Yeah, it's just the family you came from. So your family, when you hear that term, that just means your family when you were growing up. We are literally a walking statistic of so many of the things that we'll talk about today, from divorce and remarriage and all that stuff. But then my own wife and I, when we got married, we wanted to have child. I don't say children because if you asked, we wanted one. That's what we wanted. And then we had one and we were happy. Yes, we have a child. We ended up with a second one. That's a whole other story. But it's a wonderful thing. It's weird. We changed our minds eventually, but if I was sitting in your shoes, that's exactly where we were. Although it's funny, I take that back. When I was in your shoes, I think I gave, I think I said 3. That's what people ask, because people talk about this stuff, right? Before I was married. So when I'm 18, 19, I always thought, well, maybe I'll have about 3. But it's weird. I never really thought about this. By the time we were married, we definitely won. I definitely want a child, but that's it. I only want. And that's the most common answer that we have today. So this postmodern family. Today, in 2021, I'll define this for you. We don't have the nuclear family as some kind of majority. And by the way, there was a time in this country when the nuclear family made up over 50% of our households. So it was big. It was a thing. Now it's not extinct, but it's still around. Today, we simply call today's family landscape the postmodern family. And what that means is there's no quote-unquote normal anymore. There's just not. There are so many different combinations. Sorry, this is a 2-parter. The first part is there's no real normal. In other words, there's no piece of that pie that really sticks out as being, well, that's the one we see all the time. Because even though married couple with kids is the most common, it's barely. So that's probably changed by now. We just don't know it. And the second part of the postmodern family is we no longer say that there's one family type that's better than the others, because they can all be good. That doesn't mean some family types don't have challenges that other family types don't. Is there anything wrong with being a single parent raising kids? Of course not. But does it have challenges that other? Of course. But guess what? Nuclear families can be toxic too. So we don't really spend any time today saying that one type is better than the rest. 50%. So what is this? I tossed stuff on the PowerPoints that mean things. And this is just some like basic trends and ideas. 50% is an important number today. Any guesses? No, probably not. So if we took a snapshot, I don't even know. Is anyone married in here except for me? Just curious. I don't know how many undergrads at Mount Union are currently married there. I don't think I have any data on that, but just out of curiosity. Right now, if we took a snapshot of the United States, only 50% of the adults in this country are currently married. Some of you look a little surprised by that. So out of all the people 18 and over, only 50% of them are currently married. The reason that's significant is that's the lowest number that's ever been observed in this country. Which makes, what conclusion do people typically draw from that? They hear that, so what do they think? What does that lead people to believe? If I say, oh, it's the lowest number and only 50% of adults are currently married, what does that say about the state of marriage in the United States? Is it dying? Intuitively, you would think that, right? It's the lowest number. Actually, not at all. 90% of people, when we ask them, do you plan someday on getting married? Yes, the answer is yes. And that actually number is stable. So just as many people say and tell us, yep, I plan on getting married. Sure, sounds fun. I'll try it. Never tried it before, why not? So just as many people think marriage, and when we ask those questions, it's not that simple. It's things like, do you think marriage is still a good idea? Do you plan on doing it? In other words, 90% of people in this country still have a very positive outlook and plan on entering marriage at some point. So why in the world is this number so low? There's two main drivers to it, actually. Yeah. Number one, and maybe I guess they're up there, right? Maybe you intuitively figured out what those numbers are. Number one, by far, this is probably the biggest driver of it. People are waiting much, much, much longer to get married the very first time than they ever have before. This is not a bad thing, by the way. Just wait till we get to our little section, maybe in about 45 minutes or so, on divorce and remarriage. People are waiting. I guess if we back up 2 decades, the average number would have been about 19 for females and 21. It's always been like this 2-year gap, right? You're supposed to marry someone approximately 2.5 years older than you if you're a female, right? Whatever. We'll see. But 28 for females and 30 for males. That's the average. So if you still haven't found the one, don't worry. You're literally like 6 or 7 years away from the average of when people get married for the first time in this country. And of course, we could talk about all the sociological reasons as to why this is true, but the main reason is people are simply waiting until they're like financially secure to actually get married. So, but what's the second driver of this? So one is people just waiting, which is fine. It turns out it's a great thing for marriage, actually. The second one, maybe not so happy. We're living longer. We are living a lot longer in this country than we ever have before. Not that you need to know this. Like, a lot of trivia today for your next cocktail party. But if we back it up, let's go in the time machine back to 1920. I know it's a long time, but maybe your grandma and your grandpa could relate. What was the average lifespan in this country? Like, what does the average adult live to? It might be a lot lower than you think.
49.
That is. How did you know that? That's so specific, but you're exactly right. 49, what, can you imagine? Like 49 and that's it? Like you're halfway done. Congratulations. Hope you've done something with your life. And now it's like, what, 80? It's like in the 80s somewhere. So now we're living a lot longer. And what that means is we've got two things happening out there. One, people are more widow and widowers. So maybe their spouse, so remember, they're included in that number of adults who are not married. If your spouse has passed away, so think of what's driving that number of only 50% of our adults being married in this country. Well, we have a lot of people waiting to get married, but on the other end of the life cycle, we've got a lot of people who were married, but their spouse has passed away and they're now living alone. And we also have divorce happening at later ages in this country too. So that's what's really driving that number. So only 50% of adults are married. That doesn't, however, mean marriage is somehow dying and going extinct, although a lot of people use that number to talk about that because that's the sexy headline, like, oh, marriage. No longer a thing. It's not true. A lot of people are still getting married. There's just other things getting in the way. Well, let's talk about, I'm going to make some predictions. I'm going to go in my magic 8 ball and predict who you may or may not marry. There's a big trend, and this, by the way, only counts for your first marriage. So if you're, how many of you, again, you don't have to answer these questions, but there's only 6 of you, so it's kind of awkward if you don't. Do you plan on getting married? Or maybe you don't, it's fine if you don't know too, and I don't care if you plan on not. So if you do, I'm just going to tell you this. So your first marriage, you will most likely practice something called homogamy. In fact, you're very likely to. Over 90% of couples in this country, for their first marriage, practice homogamy. When I was in your shoes, I took a lot of classes on like family development, and I got taught this exact same thing. I remember hearing it and thinking like, just because you taught me that, I'm not going to do it. And guess what I ended up doing? I practiced homogamy. I didn't mean to, and no one really means to, I don't think. It just sort of happens. What is this? Does anyone know what that means? If you practice homogamy, yeah.
Isn't it rare for someone to learn you?
Pretty much. In fact, I fill my classes when I can with little snippets of fun, just to break the monotony a little bit. But yeah, this is a good example of someone casually slipping into homogamy without ever meaning to.
Are you okay?
Yeah, thanks. Oh my God, you saved my life.
There be some kind of reward for that?
Oh,
No, you should be a lot more careful crossing the street, otherwise you could die, if that bothers you.
wow.
See, to me this is a waste.
What?
The shirt you got on under your sweater. It sits in a drawer for 3 weeks waiting to come out, and when it finally does, it only sticks up half an inch out of your collar.
I'm Jerry Seinfeld.
Jeannie Steinman.
Hey, same initials. How do you like that?
I like it. Menus?
No, I know what I want.
Usual?
Yeah.
And for you? I'll have a bowl of Cheerios, not too much milk. Great, 2 bowls of Cheerios. You too?
Yeah. Hey, did you hear the bank on the corner is offering $100 if you go in there and they don't greet you with a hello? Oh, really? Nice. Now, what's with you? You come in love. Oh, come on. No, it's true. This woman saved my life. I was crossing the street. I was almost hit by a car. And then we talked, and the whole thing just seemed like a dream. If a guy saved your life, you'd be in love with him, too. No, this woman is different. She's incredible. She's just like me. She talks like me. She acts like me. She even orders cereal in a restaurant. We even have the same initials. I just realized what's going on. Now I know what I've been looking for all these years. Myself. I've been waiting for me to come along. And now I've swept myself off my feet.
At least I entertain myself up here, right? So, all right. So that's monogamy. So, but it might not mean what you think it means, because a lot of people hear that, oh, I'm going to marry someone like me, and they think kind of the stuff that was in there. Like, you're going to like the same things, laugh at the same things, eat the same foods. Not necessarily. So there's 5 really big ways that you are, I'm going to bet, 5 out of 6 of you will do this. What are the, just trying to pull them out of the air, what are the 5 big ways you marry someone like yourself? In other words, the 5 main ways your first partner, your first marital partner is like you. And I practiced all of these without even trying. Yeah, that is one of the ways. Why'd you say that first, by the way?
I feel that's an important part of like your like practices. Like if you say grace before you eat, and like how you want to raise your kids, that's a big part of like kind of like foundational.
That's true. And it turns out it's one of the big 5. You're exactly right. What else is there? So religious background, or lack thereof, by the way. Yeah. Yep, you're exactly right. So it turns out the princess usually doesn't marry the pauper, and vice versa. Yeah, you usually end up with someone in your, relatively speaking, by SES we mean it's like a social status. It includes things like income, and so you're exactly right. What else? Wow, a double answer from you.
Race.
What did you say?
Race.
Yeah, race and / ethnic background. So we'll just put an R and an E. You're exactly right. So we usually marry someone from an ethnic background that's very similar to ourselves. Did you know, I talk about this more. It turns out a lot of people your age don't know this. Did you know there was a time when interracial marriage in this country was actually illegal? It's in the 60s. Anyway, it's related to something I do in, demons and diagnosis. That's why I'm thinking of looking at you. So anyway, my first year seminar. I was shocked to learn that most of my class had no idea that that was a thing. So what else? Religion, SES, racial ethnic background. If you haven't guessed, these are kind of practical. Yeah.
Age.
Age, yes, exactly. And by age, it's true. There's 2 things about it. Usually there's a 2 to 3 gap, and usually the guy is older, but as long as there's a 2 to 3 gap, you've achieved this. And then last but not least.
I think you put it as like geography. So like basically you look
Where did we talk about this?
Asian
Wow, you actually remembered.
Yeah.
Usually I teach things and I just figure it falls out. Like, yep, absolutely. So geography. You usually marry someone from, relatively speaking, the same place. My wife and I both have the same religious type background. We both have the same jobs, if you didn't know. She works here and she's a therapist too. Weird. Same racial ethnic background. We're in that 2 to 3 gap, and she's from Ohio, and I'm from Ohio. So that's by geography, that's kind of what we don't mean same town, thank God, but Ohio, or even like the greater area. In other words, you're probably not going to marry someone from another country. That's what we mean by that. You might, of course it's possible, but 90% of people, how boring are we, right? We end up marrying someone from 100 miles away that for all intents and purposes is very much like us. The opposite is something called heterogamy. And of course, what that means is defying statistics by just one of those. So even if you cheat on one of those, you can tell your spouse, hey, did you know we're practicing heterogamy? I've always wanted to practice heterogamy. What's it like? So naughty. It turns out when people get married for a second time or a third time, they're actually more likely to practice heterogamy than homogamy. That's what I mean by all bets are off. Second marriages and third marriages, usually in one of those ways, we end up practicing heterogamy. And I do want you to know this, but I also just think it's interesting. And if you turn out to be a marriage and family therapist and you work with couples, this might be good knowledge for you to have. Out of those 5 ways that we just listed, well, you listed most of them. So if you remember this, don't say anything. Out of those 5 ways, which of these has the worst prognosis? What I mean by that is, let's say I have a couple who's practicing heterogamy. Which of those 5 ways has the worst prognosis in terms of, what I mean by that is, unlike the others, they might get divorced. There's a real good chance they're going to end up splitting up. Because there's one of those, that when people don't do it, it actually turns out to not be good for the health of the marriage. It doesn't mean they're going to get divorced. It just means out of all of those, this one has the worst. If you were going to.
I was gonna say.
Why would you say that?
Well, I know.
Yeah, it kind of bubbled up naturally. You're exactly right. So out of all of these, and about, I probably told the same story in Aging Adulthood too. At Ohio State, the Ohio State University, when I was working there, one thing that I started was a premarital therapy group. So if you didn't know, it's not a law. I think it should be, but that's my own personal bias. Premarital counseling or premarital therapy is what you go to before you get married. And unfortunately, I kind of went through the standards. So the guy who married us, he did his own premarital counseling. And by premarital counseling, he did what most people go through. What do most people experience, by the way, premarital counseling? It's nothing of substance, let me tell you that. It's usually like, who's going to come to the wedding? What's the wedding going to look like? What? That's not premarital. That's premarital planning for the marriage ceremony. But that's kind of what it is. So at Ohio State, I started a premarital therapy group that actually asked real questions. So my goal of this was to make sure that, because I was dealing mainly with young people, there was 19, 20-year-olds who were undergrads at Ohio State who were engaged to be married. And to me, this is just my take on it, the goal of premarital therapy is to talk about at least a lot of the hard issues so that maybe 10 years down the road, at least you can say you've had this conversation and we're not getting shocked by something, right? I'll never forget, my wife and I, we lived in a condo for the first 3 years of our marriage. The neighbors across the street, they were going through a really hard time. And the reason they're going through a hard time, they were married longer than us. The wife was pregnant, which was great. The husband had kept it a secret from her that he never wanted kids. What? They never talked, and we talked to them. They never had a conversation about kids. Who the hell gets dates and gets married and never has a conversation? Like something so basic, like, would you like to reproduce? And if so, how many times? We just talked about it in here. They honestly never had the conversation. So it was like the first time. So that's what my goal was, right? So I had this premarital therapy group. There were 3 couples at a time. But we would talk about real stuff like religion, right? And how many kids would you like to have? And those, so in other words, real topics. And I had this one couple. It was the first time I did it. To be honest, they were so annoying because they had everything worked out. They had perfect answers to everything. And in fact, it kind of became a joke. We met 5 times, 5 weeks in a row. It became kind of a running joke with the rest of the couples that they didn't even need this. They were just going to it because their pastor said they had to, and but everything I brought up, oh yes, we figured that out. Oh yes, we know this. Oh yes, 3 kids, boom, boom, boom. But anyway, the first thing the reason they became annoying was the very first session because we talked about religion. And I was actually amazed at this couple because he was Catholic. And I don't just mean calls himself Catholic and they go to church on Christmas. No, he was a real practicing, he goes to mass, on a regular basis, so he was actually Catholic. She was Jewish, and I don't just mean oh yeah, my parents I think were Jewish, whatever. No, she went to synagogue, she actually was a practicing Jewish religious person. And they met each other, and they were working it out. Their wedding ceremony, get this, they were going to have, do you remember this? They were going to have a dual religious ceremony, and their families loved it. I mean, usually that's where we see the arguments, right? The family's you can't marry a Jew. You can't marry a Catholic. You can't marry, right? No, their families were in harmony. They were going to have a priest and a rabbi at the wedding. I'm like, what? I don't know what the hell I'm going to talk to you guys about. But anyway, last session. It's session number 5. There's literally 15 minutes to go. And we're all just wrapping up, little pleasantries, oh yes, have a wonderful marriage. You have all this kind of stuff. And just out of nowhere, I remember he was a guy. He was sitting on the left-hand side. He's I've been wondering this whole time, when your kids grow up, what are they going to be, Catholic or Jewish? And like clockwork, he said Catholic, she said Jewish, and they realized their faces turned like bright red, and they looked at each other like, ah. And the guy was like, oh shit. Like, he was like, what did I just do? They hadn't talked about this. And you actually mentioned it in your answer. There was, when it came to loving each other, like they respected each other. Like, oh yes, you're a Jew, and I still love you, even though you're a Jew. And she was kind of the same way in the families. But there was something about their kids when they thought about that. I can't let my kid be Jewish. I mean, I can't let my kid be Catholic. There was something about that became a sticking point for them. And if you're wondering, they came in for like 3 sessions on their own, and of course they magically worked it out. But anyway, yeah, religion. For whatever reason, I just spent 10 minutes on that. We could have just moved on. But I told you I'll tell you lots of stories from the office when I can. All right, so any questions? Just some basics about the landscape of marriage in this country. Fewer people are currently married. Doesn't mean marriage is dead. You're probably going to practice monogamy. Your second marriage, though, you might practice heterogamy. And interfaith marriages are the most difficult. So, little summary so far. Another trend that we see in this country is cohabitation. I don't want to assume everyone knows what this means, but if you're a cohabitator, what does that mean? Anyone? Yes, very basic.
You're living with somebody else, like the person you're dating.
Exactly. That just means you're living with someone, but you're not currently married. Cohabitation. This is meant for entertainment purposes, by the way, what I'm about to show you. But this is the message that a lot of people receive about cohabitation. Again, this is not meant, although this isn't comedy, so this isn't like this is sort of like Date with the Family. This wasn't produced to produce humor, but it does, at least for me. Maybe it will for you. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll scare you. I actually think it's designed to scare you. Some girl's project, I guess, she made for a class, and I found it on the internet like 6 years ago, and I can't get her face out of my head.
So, you think cohabitation is a good idea? A lot of times when a couple has been dating for a while, they decide that they should move in together and live together without being married. It's called cohabitation. After all, you're in love, and living together is a good way to get to know each other better and to test out the relationship. And besides, everyone is doing it, right? Well, here's what you haven't been told about cohabitation. Here are the facts. First of all, cohabitation does not necessarily lead to marriage. In fact, 40% of unmarried couples who move in together break up within 5 years.
Now, out of all the things that you're going to see on this is actually true. There's a good percentage of cohabiting couples that end up breaking up. Is that a bad thing? No, it just means you broke up. So you're not going to get congratulations, you did get married. But I think this is the only thing on here that's actually somewhat factual. But are you scared yet? I get scared watching this every time.
Modern researchers deny a correlation between cohabitation and divorce, but previous studies have found that couples who cohabit before marriage have a higher rate of divorce than those who do not live together before marriage. And if you have kids while you're cohabiting, the results can be disastrous. Consider the fact: children born to cohabiting couples experience a 170% higher rate of having their parents break up before they are 12 years old than children of married couples do. In addition, children of cohabiting parents are more likely to have emotional and social problems, including drug use, depression, and dropping out of high school. Also, children in cohabiting households are at least 3 times more likely to be physically, sexually, or emotionally abused than children from intact marriages between their biological parents. These statistics show that children suffer from having parents who cohabit. And sadly, this is not rare. Currently, more than 40% of children in the United States spend time in a cohabiting household. Ultimately, the decision is up to you, but the statistics are clear. The truth is, cohabitation is creating unstable families, and that's a fact.
All right. I just had to show that because I can't talk about this without not showing it. So cohabitation, I think I spelled it wrong up there. We can change that because it's bugging me. There we go. Cohabitation, yes. Cohabitation simply means living with a partner that you're not married to. It's a growing trend in our country. I think about 30, 40 years ago, it was about 10% or so couples that lived together in some arrangement before they got married. Today, it's about 60. In fact, it's about 65%. In other words, today, it is the norm for someone to move in with someone in some fashion before they actually get married. If you look it up, if you Google cohabitation and you look at videos, 90% of the information you're going to find comes from some kind of religious source. And I'll just be open. This is what I was told. I was told that, well, they didn't call it cohabitation. My pastor called it living in sin. And I was taught that it was evil, kind of the same things that girl just, maybe that's why it resonates with me, because I was told those exact same things, that if you cohabitate with someone, you're going to get divorced. If you have kids, they're going to be screwed up. But that's kind of what I was taught, and when you're taught things, it's what you grow up believing. I mean, using the word evil seems kind of silly. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? I don't know. It's up to you. I guess when you become a therapist, you learn not to judge people's choices. So whether it's a good idea or a bad idea is a personal choice. Now, I will say this. There is something that is true. We call it the cohabitation effect. But I think in the next 10 or 15 minutes, you'll understand maybe why this exists. The cohabitation effect says that people that cohabitate have a slightly, and that's the key, have a slightly increased rate of divorce compared to couples who don't. This is technically true, but more on that in the next 10 minutes, because that is true. And maybe this is a good time to get this out there. You'll write it down again in about maybe 20, 25 minutes or so. I don't know how I'm predicting these times, by the way. I don't know that. What is the current divorce rate in our country? Does anyone know? What's the number that always gets tossed around, or often gets tossed around? Still today, I still hear it pop up. What would you guess? In other words, what percentage of couples get divorced? At least once. At least. I had a neighbor, the Steinerts. They got married. So I only lived in that house only. I lived in that house for 18 years. In my 18 years there, they only lived there the first 12 of my life, and they moved out. But in the first 12 years of me living next to them, that same couple got divorced and remarried 3 times. They broke up, literally, not just break up, they're separated. They literally got a legal divorce, then got remarried. We went to 2 of their remarriages. That's how I know. But I don't remember the first one. I was too tiny. It was this running joke in our neighborhood. The Steiners. Things are bad. So don't worry. I don't know why I told you that. What was I asking? Now I can forget what I was asking you. Oh, yeah. What's our divorce rate? Sorry. How did I forget that? The number that gets tossed out a lot is 50%. Have you ever heard that? Oh, 50%. No, oh my God. It's nowhere near reality whatsoever. The actual divorce rate in this country is about 29, 30%. I'm not saying that's great. But something that you should know about that is that's no different than any other industrialized country on the planet. In other words, there's nothing special about the divorce rate in the United States. It's just like every other country. That's like us, put it that way, culturally. So we got about a 30% divorce rate. What this means, the cohabitation effect, is it bumps up to about 35, 40%. So we do see an increase. But it turns out there's different types of cohabitators, right? It turns out we can't lump all people who cohabitate into the same pile. The cohabitation effect, though, we only see that when we lump everyone together. But I think when you understand the different types of cohabitators, okay, now this makes a little bit more sense. And maybe some types are maybe smarter than others, put it that way. All right, so here's our 4 types. So think about yourself. Maybe you're cohabitating right now, maybe you're not. But our first type of cohabitator, and we would find this out by simply asking the couple, hey couple, yes, why are you cohabitating? Well, we're cohabitating because and this is a very popular choice. People cohabitate, what do you suppose trial means? Yeah. Exactly. They want to see if they're compatible. Let's see if we can actually live together before we get married. Because when we get married, we're going to have to live with each other. We call this a trial cohabitation. Out of the 4 different types, this group has the highest rate of breakup before getting married. But there's actually a very practical reason for this. If you go into something saying, we want to see if this is going to work out, what's on your radar? What are you looking for? Yeah.
You're looking for like issues.
Yeah, you're looking for
what's not going to work.
Exactly. You're looking for stuff that's not going to work from the get-go. And what are you likely to do? Well, there's no commitment for marriage, so get the eject button. Go. How many of you have had a roommate in your life, or a sister, or a family member that you've lived with? Is living with any human being perfect? Oh my God, rarely, if ever. Every day there's something. In fact, they always say, you don't need to write this down, but they say no matter what kind of human you're moving in with, a roommate, a partner, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a married partner, the first 6 months are really rough, usually, for most people, because you're adjusting to living with another human. You may think you know, but you don't know. You have never seen them at 2 a.m. before. Right? And when you move in with someone, well, I guess before you move in with someone, well, I don't know if you all know, but like early dating, right? It's like, oh, like everything's perfect. And I remember like cleaning my apartment like obsessively before my now wife would come over, like, oh my God, he's so clean. Oh, no, not really. That was just the act I was putting on while we were dating. I've always told people, like, you're in love with each other when you can fart in front of each other. If you can do that, you're in love, because now you just don't care. Like, great, the act is gone. But that's what the trial people are doing. They're looking for problems, and they hit the eject button when they see it. A good portion of them do end up getting married, though, so that's not so bad. So trial cohabitators, dating. What do you suppose? This one always entertains me. Like, but I actually knew someone. I knew one couple like this. What's a dating cohabitator? No guesses? Well, I'll tell you. What this means is this is a couple who's been dating. So imagine a couple that you know who's been dating. For us, it was Jeff and Kate. Jeff and Kate were dating. I think they've been dating since they were born. I think when they were born, their parents said, let's date. They've just always been together. They're now married, by the way, with 3 kids very happily. But when we were in college, they were dating cohabitators. What this means is you've never talked about marriage. In other words, it could be a thing. You're just a dating couple. But for whatever reason, you decide to just move in with each other. So we have a couple who's living together. We ask them, do you guys plan on getting married? No. Why are you living together? I don't know. It just seems easy. I guess they would say things like, and they did, like, well, we're always together anyway. Why not just have one place? Okay, well then you're a dating cohabitator. So there's honestly no real intention of, hey, we're getting married next year or in 2 years. We're just dating, and this seems like a practical arrangement. The third, oh, these people are cute. The third is your substitute cohabitator. And by the way, the dating, very likely to get married. Oddly enough, you might think substitutes would be very least likely to get married, but they do. The substitute cohabitators, when we ask them, why are you living together? What do they say? I love this answer. It's so precious. I just want to hold them. Yeah, that's cute. They say things like, we're in love, and I don't need to get married to show my love to that person. We don't believe in marriage. Marriage is created by society. We don't need to fall into that. That's not for us. I hate using celebrity examples because they're celebrities and they're bad examples. But do you remember Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt? They said this exact same thing. We don't need to get, people would always ask them, why aren't you getting married? Like, we don't need to get married. But marriage, that's such an archaic social construction. They speak like, oh, what they end up doing? Getting married. What they end up doing? Getting divorced. Was it any shock that a couple who said they don't believe in marriage, when they get married, ends up getting divorced? Well, probably not, because 2 years ago you just said you don't believe in marriage. So, but you ended up getting married for other reasons. Then finally we have this last group. And this is actually where I ended up. Committed cohabitators. Yes, my wife and I cohabitated before we got married. We were living in sin. So are our kids 3 times more likely to be sexually and emotionally abused? Probably not. Committed cohabitators means make what you might think it means. What it means is you plan on getting married. In other words, we were actually engaged before we did. Of course, certain people in my family were having heart attacks. Oh my God, like lightning is going to come down and strike us. We will be smitten. If we have kids, they'll most likely represent Satan in some way. But anyway, it's only a small faction of my family. It's not like that's where I grew up with. They entertain me. But that's what we were, committed. And it just became practical. Like, why would I sign, not sure how many of you sign leases on apartments and condo, whatever. Why in the world would I sign a lease for a year for an apartment when we're getting married in 9 months anyway? Like, that's kind of what it ended up being. It turns out, if we just look at these 3, if we look at trial, dating, and substitute and lump them together, we see the cohabitation effect. In other words, these 3 groups have a higher risk of divorce if and when they get married. But if we just look at the committed cohabitators, we see no difference whatsoever between couples who live together and couples who don't. And by the way, committed doesn't even necessarily mean engaged. That you don't. It just means you plan on someday maybe getting married. And if we just look at those, and by the way, this is the greatest percentage, by the way, of our cohabitators. So if we remove them, suddenly this cohabitation effect doesn't exist anymore. But there's one more thing to add that's actually not up here. There's one other factor that actually also removes the cohabitation effect, no matter which of the groups we're looking at. And what would you suppose that is? Any ideas? There's one variable that if we have it, and then it doesn't matter which group we're in. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt are not good examples of this. It's age. If the couple is 25 years, if the partners in the couple are 25 years or older when they move in together, and they end up getting married, the cohabitation effect doesn't exist. So age. The problem with this, though, is younger people are much more likely to cohabit than older people. So most of our cohabitators are between the ages of about 18 and 25. But if you're older when you begin the cohabitation process, I don't care which category you're in, you're probably not, your divorce rate is no different than anybody else. So cohabitation, to sum this up, and again, people's personal ideas about it are your own personal ideas. So if you don't want to do it, I wouldn't recommend doing it. But if you do, there's probably nothing wrong with it. So just put it that way. So no value judgments here. Cohabitation is, the main takeaway is the 4 different kinds, the effect it might have on divorce rates, and then the fact that today, most couples actually do it before they get married. Moving on. We are doing good time-wise. I'm liking this. We might actually hit the goal, at least close to it. Kids. Oh, yes, kids. We love them, right? We ask young therapists, who would you like to work with? Oh, children. Everyone wants to work with children. We love kids. Why are you studying human development? Oh, I want to learn about children. All right, so by the numbers, a couple things you've already learned. That magical number 1, why is it up there? Well, when we ask most married couples, that's the key, I guess. It's weird, I never thought about that before. When I was in your shoes, I said the same things. 3, out of curiosity, why'd you say, I don't know, maybe you don't even know. Why'd you say 4?
I have 3 siblings, so I just come from a
So thanks. That's funny because I have 2 sisters, so maybe that's why I always said 3. I don't know. Why'd you say 5? I think that's the highest number anyone's ever said.
I think big families are fun.
Big families are why not, right? All right, just curious. But yeah, so married people, when we ask them, 1. And this other, does anyone know what this other number is? 1.9? The number kind of creeps me out a little bit, at least the definition. 1.9 is the TFR, which stands for the total fertility rate. It's a weird, I don't know, it's weird. It's weird, just maybe it's because I have a wife and 2 daughters. Does anyone know what that means, the total fertility rate? This is the average number of children a female will have in this country. Weird. Isn't that, it's just a weird thing to talk about. What's my total fertility rate? You'll have 1 child and then 90% of another one. Now, the reason this is significant is this is the first time, and we'll find out from new census data soon, hopefully. Maybe this has changed, maybe not. So all this stuff is based off of our last big samples. This is the lowest this has ever been in our country. So you've already learned a couple things about how our society is changing. I'll tell you, working at Mount Union, it's actually glaringly obvious. This has practical implications for the world that we live in. Again, you don't need to write this down, but man, today is just full of so many fun facts for you. At the University of Mount, you guys never hear these conversations, but as faculty we do because it keeps us up at night. They talk about it. It's coming. Now it's only about 3 or 4 years away. There's a cliff coming in the world of higher education, and that cliff comes from a generation now of people, 1, delaying getting married, 2, not really wanting 5 kids. They only want 1. And 3, people just having less kids in general. What it means for places like Mount Union is every year, and if any of you have people who are teachers or educators in higher ed, you might have heard your parents talk about this. You're shaking your head. What am I going to say? You don't know? You're like, oh yeah, preach it. There are fewer and fewer high school graduates with every passing year in the state of, and it's not just Ohio, it's everywhere. In the United States, there are fewer 18-year-olds graduating, which means there are fewer 18-year-olds coming to college, which means there are fewer colleges that are going to even exist in 10 years. Some places that you know very well, the University of Akron, I can't believe they're still not bankrupt. Like they have so many issues going on there. So, right, you think about like the University of Akron, that's huge, right? They're in trouble. Mount Union, we're actually doing okay. Believe it or not, so I'll just be honest. We've actually held pretty steady. Maybe it's because of our reputation, who knows? But in other words, places like Mount Union are like fighting for every body that we can possibly get, because with every single passing year, there's less and less and less and less kids. So this it's not just a fact that you write down. It depends on what industry you get into. There's just fewer human beings right around. Well, let's talk about 2 things, marital satisfaction and marital stability, and the impact that having kids has. And if you were sitting back there wondering, is there another humorous segue coming? Yes, there is. By marital satisfaction, we mean something very simple. How happy are you currently in your marriage? But marriage stability means something different. How likely are you to get divorced? Have you talked about divorce? Is divorce an option for you? You may think that these 2 things go together hand in hand, but they don't. They're actually mutually exclusive from one another. In other words, there are a lot of couples. I mean, usually if satisfaction is high, stability is low, but the inverse isn't always true. There's lots of families or couples who are perfectly miserable, but they have no intention of ever getting a divorce because it's not an option for them. So again, can they go together? Of course, these 2 things can go together, but not always. So the question is, what impact does having children have on marital satisfaction and marital stability? Before we answer that, let me put it this way. I always get entertained, always. It just makes me laugh on the inside when I have lots of colleagues running around these halls who have no children. I mean, they might have pets they call their kids, which also makes me laugh. I mean, it's cute. I get it. And you should treat pets like children. You should, right? Don't let them out in the 5-degree days and things like that. I think that's wonderful. But it always makes me laugh when my colleagues without kids talk about how busy they are and how tired they are because they have no idea. And I could go off on my own tangents, but this guy does it much better than I could. But this will give you a good snapshot of why what we're about to write down is true.
There are people in this room who do have children, and there are people in this room who don't have children. And the people who don't have children, they think they know, don't they? They think they know. They know what it means to have children. Sometimes they chat about it, don't they? They're little couples. You know, oh, I'd love to start a family one day with you. You make a really good dad. Oh, you'd be an amazing mom. Wouldn't it be so lovely having little versions of you and me running around? I'd love to have a family. And you think you know what you're talking about. No idea! You have no idea what it's like. You have no idea how difficult things will become in your life. Things that you don't even consider to be things will become nearly impossible when you have children. I'm talking about things like leaving the house, for example. This is how people without children leave the house. Shall we leave the house? Yes. This is how I leave the house almost every day. Lucas, Oscar! Come downstairs! We're late! Why don't you downstairs? Put your shoes on. I don't know where my shoes are! Put your shoes on, go and find your shoes. Where did you see them last?
On my feet?
After that, get your shoes on. Come here. Arms up, arms in, arms in. That's my wife. She's so tired. She can't Where we going? Where we going, darling? Honey, you've got Lucas's shoes on your hands. I found your shoes, darling. You put your shoes on. Come downstairs! We're late! Put your coat on.
I don't want to wear my coat.
You know, people without children, you know how you do zips up. I've seen how much time you have in your lives. How you focus on it. You get the one in fabric. You just pop it in there, it nestles in. And you pause, thinking about your free life. What you might and then you just glide up, don't you? You don't have time for that shit in my life. Every single morning. Stay still. Put another coat on. I can't. I've ruined this. I'm sorry. I need a situation where Ozzy, my 3-year-old, will never come downstairs. The only way to get him to leave the house is to bluff. They have to pretend they were leaving without him. It's the only way to work. We have to all go, bye-bye, Ozzy. We're all going there. We're all going. My other son, not the 6-year-old. We're leaving Ozzy. We're going to stay here. Say goodbye. We're not really leaving. We're talking to you. Okay? Say goodbye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Ozzy. Bye-bye. But he doesn't care. He just goes, bye-bye. Then we have to come back in and explain to him, we're not really leaving, darling. We love you. It's okay. I'll buy you something. Will you come if I buy you something? This is every single time we leave the house. The other day we leave the house and I just had nothing to say to my wife, I'm sorry, I can't do this. We're bluffing. We're saying bye-bye to him. And my wife says, let's go and get him. I'm like, stop. No, I've had it. No. Stop. I cannot go through this every single time we leave the house. It's driving me insane. Okay? I say we call his bluff. I think he has to learn this. Okay? Hey, let's go. Let's just go. Let's go to Corfu. Let's have a nice holiday. You have no idea what it's like. You childless people. You have no idea. Driving, you go driving. You're driving cars, don't you? Driving along. What's the biggest drama you have to put up with? Oh, it's a bit chilly. Oh, put the blower on. That's nice now. Look at they opened a new Carluccio. We should go there. We could go there any night. We could go there any night. Oh, what's this song? I love this one. Freedom! I strap my children into the car. I work out what will cut off the blood supply, then I ease it a bit. Stay there! I'm trying to behave normally, but what's this song? It's the wheels on the bus. New Carluccio's there. We will never go there. I was checking my children in the rearview mirror to see that they're safe. On the motorway, okay? I look like you just angle it to check that they're both okay because you're looking after them. Neither of them were there. They had both wound the windows down and had their heads on the motorway out of the window. Both of them, either side. just lost it. My heroes, they're having the time of their lives. And the motorway, going 80 miles an hour to stick my head out of my window to try and communicate with my child. Get it out! My wife's doing it too. All four of us with our heads out of the window. Meanwhile, a childless couple is driving past. Oh, look at the kids. I'd love to start a family one day. No idea what you're talking about. Sleeping. Sleeping at night. This is how people go to. Yeah, most nights say, good night, darling. Good night. Good night. Sometimes you go, sleep well. The other one goes, I will. It's how cocky, how arrogant you are. Well, now I will. Good night, darling. Have a good sleep. Good night. It's been a long time since my wife and I said good night to each other. Okay? Now we just go, good luck. All through the night, screaming. Sometimes they just wake up wide awake in the middle of the night. I'm asleep, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. I wake, and sometimes you don't realize it, but you sort of half open your eyes. Sometimes when you're asleep, I half open my eyes, my son is in my face. What are you doing here? Tiresome! 2 o'clock in the morning, what do you want? I want to go to school. School? What are you talking about? Don't go back to bed. Got my shoes on. You do, you found my shoes. Fix my jacket. What are you doing? It's 2 o'clock in the morning, you idiot. Go to bed. Where's Ozzy? He's by the front door. He's still over there. It's 2 o'clock.
It's so true, but sometimes it's cute. And in fact, before you write anything down, here's a good quote that I always have people write down when it talks about kids. It's not from me. It's from another comedian called Dana Carvey. Maybe you've heard of him. He's older. He used to be on Saturday Night Live when I was a kid. But Dana Carvey describes having kids like this, and I love it because it sort of captures it perfectly. Having kids is the most difficult thing, but the best thing at the exact same time. And that's exactly what it is. So this stuff is true. My daughter's now, one's 13 and one's 9, so we're definitely out of this. In fact, we used to I wonder when we'll have a night again when we don't get waken up by crying. Like when they're little, it just doesn't happen. There's always something. That hasn't happened in a really long time. But last night, I think it was like 1:30, 1:45 in the morning. I had fallen asleep sometimes from usual, but of a child. I had just fallen asleep really well, and I just heard, I don't know why they always pick me. And my wife, of course, never wakes up. I think maybe it's some selective hearing going on. But anyway, I hear like, Daddy, Dad. I'm like, oh no, and it's hey, this the night now. So it sounded like something was really wrong. And I go in the room. She's 9, so she's like in the 3rd grade, right? And I go in there. I'm like, what is it? What is it? And she's like, is it normal for your eyes to just stop working sometime? Like, what? And she's like, my right eye. I don't think it's working correctly. Is that normal? And I'm like, oh my God. So again, it's just, you never know when these things are going to happen. So if I look a little tired, because guess what happened after that? Couldn't fall back asleep. That was I knew it was going to happen. So what does it do? What does having kids do to marital satisfaction? It pulls it into the gutter. That's what it does. So we actually see a trend. So you guys, you can think of how old you are. We actually can assess this, and we do this by simply asking couples, how happy are you with your current marriage? And this is not a joke. This is what it really looks like. If this is satisfaction over here, and this is the age of the kid, when the kid is born, we see it go down. And then it kind of stays there for a while. And then when we hit about age 14, you've all heard the rumors about teenage years being really hard, right? It's actually a myth. You actually see the opposite. As the older the kids get, the satisfaction starts to go back. And then by the time you leave the house, the satisfaction goes right back to where it was when you guys were first born. Congratulations. You've destroyed your parents' marriage. No, you haven't. There's more on this later. So, in general, marital satisfaction does go down. when you have children. But this shouldn't be a shock. Just ask your parents. And that's why Dana Carvey's quote is true. It's extraordinary. Of course it's extraordinarily stressful. Things you never thought of become issues. And I promise you, everything that guy said, when you do have kids someday, if you do, you'll be able to relate to that in a whole new way. Because like you, I was once one of you. I remember being a therapist, actually. I feel so, I want to like write letters of apology. Because I met a lot of families with kids before I ever had kids. In fact, I met families with kids before I was married. And I would always say, well, I can empathize, right? No, I really couldn't. I thought I could, but until you're really there, you just can't. What about stability, though? What happens to stability? Likelihood to divorce. Yeah. It actually increases, yep. Stability, so satisfaction goes down while stability actually increases. In other words, it's very true that some, in a lot of cases, kids decrease the likelihood of divorce. A couple that might have been contemplating it before now is not contemplating it. I can hear this a lot. Why are you staying together? Well, for the kids. Why are you staying together? Is that a good idea? Well, we'll talk about that maybe in a little bit. It depends on the level of satisfaction and what's going on inside the house. So far, this maybe doesn't sound so good. You just watched that clip. I just told you that satisfaction goes down. It actually turns out there's 3 keys. The 3 common denominators. There's actually 3 things that you can do. I sound like an infomercial. If you pay me $15.99, I will tell you the 3 keys to saving your marriage when you have kids. Now I sound like that naked health guy that pops up on my YouTube all the time. What this means is that, no. So does, even for the best couples, does satisfaction go down? Yes. But what we mean is it doesn't have to go down in the gutter. It can, but it doesn't have to. As long as you do 3 things. And they seem so practical, yet for some couples they are so elusive. In fact, if you ever do work with couples, trust me, you will be amazed at the simple practical things that some people, when they're inside a problem, can't figure out. And they just need help with some simple instructions. What are these, would you suppose? What are the 3 things as in a relationship to staving off the horrible effects of having children? Any ideas? Yeah.
How they be able to share responsibility.
There we go. We'll start. Usually that's number 3, but we'll call this co-parenting. So number 1, this list is in no particular order. Co-parenting, and by co-parenting, what we don't mean, it's kind of maybe a little more tricky than some people think. But co-parenting and I like the word shared responsibility. That's good. But what that doesn't mean, though, is you've each changed the same number of diapers in a day, right? Did you change 50 yet? Yes. So, I guess I'm going to be up till 6. What we mean by co-parenting is that if they're being honest, each partner feels like they're doing their fair share. Now, if one person is at work all day, is the other person going to have to do it? Of course. But that other person that comes home better pick up the slack when they get home. As long as both partners can honestly say, I feel like my partner is contributing fairly, you're good. That's what co-parenting means. What happens a lot, though, you don't need to write this next part down, though. What happens? So it's a little insidious in relationships sometimes. Someone's not honest, right? But they'll just hold it in. Like, oh yes, they'll say like, I feel you're fine. But really, if they're honest, they feel like they're doing way too much. But they don't want to say anything because they don't want to upset the other partner. But what's building up inside them is resentment and hatred, like pure, raw anger, like growing inside this person. And that can be toxic. So co-parenting simply means, yep, I can honestly say my partner's helping out as much as he or she can. And if they're not, you have a conversation about that. Say, I really feel like, could you help out a little bit more? And hopefully your partner obliges and says, sure. That means you have a good partner. What's the other 2? And these are probably all interdependent of one another. I mean, what I mean is they're connected. It's hard to imagine one of these without the other 2, really. What did my neighbors not do? You remember my story. we're in the condo, what they do, what they not do, which seems so simple. I'm glad they're resonating. Yes. Yeah.
Did they communicate about like what they wanted?
Yeah. Number two is simply planning on having kids in the first place. I told you these are pretty simple, practical. What that means is, have you talked and do you agree? Is there agreement on having children? Or is it a shock? Like, again, you might find it funny, but actually, it doesn't, as a therapist, it doesn't shock me at all that they never had this conversation, because so many couples don't have real conversations. They just fall in love and get married, think things are going to be perfect. So by planning, we don't necessarily mean like when exactly, like in April of 2025, we will have our first child. All of this means something very simple. You've just talked about it and you've agreed, yeah, we want kids. Maybe 2, maybe 5, who knows. What about number 3? This is a lesson that I watched my roommate learn the hard way. One of my roommates. I had many roommates. Number 3 is having very high satisfaction before having the children. So our 3 factors is, I would say, being anywhere between an 8 and a 10 on marital satisfaction. So if you have really high satisfaction before having kids, you work as a team and co-parent, and you actually have a child that was planned, you're not going to see some horrible, gut-wrenching, like, rip out all the satisfaction of your marriage. But if you don't have these things, it's very likely that you will. What this means is, and maybe you've heard this mantra before, having a child doesn't fix a broken marriage. It doesn't fix an unsatisfied relationship. In fact, it makes it a lot worse. Coupled with, you're very less likely to break up. So what happens is you end up having a kid, which holds you together, but what the relationship that's holding together is just in the gutter, which is really bad for everybody involved. And that's, long story short, I once had a roommate whose girlfriend decided to stop taking birth control without telling him, and he was about to break up with her. Like, literally, like, we knew this was coming. Their relationship was just really nasty. It was just horrible. But she stopped taking her birth control without telling him, and then, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant. And she thought getting pregnant would save everything. And it didn't. They ended up getting married. That didn't go so well. But anyway, like, see, it's people are walking statistics. So don't, like, maybe you've heard that. Hopefully it makes sense to you. If you're unhappy now, you're going to be really unhappy 9 months from now when that little person comes around. All right, we're not going to get quite as far as I wanted to, but we'll get far enough. We'll open the door to divorce. We probably won't get to remarriage, but it's perfectly fine. I knew we would have a little bit left over for next week. But so divorce 101. So obviously, as a marriage and family therapist, one thing you will work with a lot is couples going through a divorce or maybe post-divorce or contemplating divorce. And one of my favorite phone calls ever, I don't know why this just popped in my head. It's the only time it's ever happened, but they were one of my favorite families to work with. I actually got a phone call, and it was a couple with 2 kids, and very practical. They were going to get a divorce, and the reason they wanted to come to family therapy was they wanted to do it correctly. They wanted to break up in such a way that their kids. I've never heard that before. It was wonderful. We had a great time. It took about 5 to 10 sessions, and boom, I think everything was fine. So, but divorce. So. You've heard of the 7-year itch. When it comes to divorce, we're actually not true. We have what's called the 8-year itch. The first 8 years of a marriage is the time when a couple is most likely to get a divorce if they're going to. The first 8 years. So if you can just hack it, right, for 8 years, you're probably perfectly fine. Does that mean it can't happen later? Of course not. But 8 years is that's when it will typically happen, if it's going to happen. One thing that's not up here, this is where it's not, you've already written down the divorce rate, but it might be helpful just to write it down again. Our divorce rate in this country is about what? 29, about 30%. Yeah, the ballpark. About 30%. And you should know there's, again, really nothing special about that. You don't hear it as much as you used to, but people used to toss that number out a lot. Oh, there's 50% divorce rate. just so you know contextually where that comes from, was that ever true in our country? Any ideas? No. Just so you know contextually, and you don't need to write this down, there was one period of time in our country when the divorce rate came close to 50%. And that was in the 1970s. Anyone know what happened in the 1970s? I don't think I talked about that. No.
Is that like feminist movements, like women getting more rights and like
Well,
being able to file for divorce?
There you go. So first of all, more women are getting educated, actually getting jobs, right? And having lives and careers outside. The nuclear family is being eradicated. In other words, women are actually now allowed socially to have emotional conversations during dinner and maybe bring up problems that are happening inside a marriage. No, but really, the biggest change that happened was in 1979. And because of the feminist movement, a law was passed called no-fault divorce laws. Something that we probably take completely for granted in this country right now. What does that mean? So it's actually not a federal law. It's actually state by state. There's actually a couple states that still don't have this on the books. But I think 48 out of 50 do. But in Ohio, you can get what's called a no-fault divorce, which is probably a good thing for both parties involved. But anyone know what that means? I don't know why would you? Yeah. Yeah, you can get divorced for what we call irreconcilable differences, right? You've fallen out of love, okay, don't have a divorce, go get one. You may not know, you can go to Barnes and Noble, you can get a take-home divorce kit and get your own divorce. You don't even need a lawyer, you can do it yourself. Honey, did you bring the divorce kit home? Yes, I did. And here's the pumpernickel, it's fine. But anyway, yeah, so no, right? It makes divorce, people were scared of this. Like proponents of marriage were saying, this is going to destroy marriage forever. And divorce, people are going to get divorced left and right. And we did. For a couple years, we saw a surge of divorces. Well, what was going on? We had millions of women who were in marriages that they did not want to be a part of. And for the first time in our country's history, they could actually get legally separated out of these marriages when they didn't want to be in them. What did you have to, you said, did you say prove or did you say prove? What did you have to prove? This might blow your mind. Before the no-fault divorce laws, what was the only way as a female to get a divorce? Again, this is going to sound completely archaic to you. Yeah.
Was it for like cheating?
You had to prove in a court of law. So first of all, there's your first hurdle, by the way. Is going to court cheap? No. So you had to have a lawyer, and you had to go to court, and you had to prove that your husband was either being unfaithful to you or planned to kill you. Awesome. So that was our bar that we had set. There was a couple other things. I'm simplifying it, but the essence of it was exactly what you said. You had to prove something nefarious was going on. Is that easy to do? My God, no. Hiring private investigators and things like that. So no, people didn't get divorced, not because they weren't unhappy, because they couldn't. There was no way out of these marriages whatsoever. So that's where we got this big bump. But literally ever since that year, since 1980, it's been on the decline, and it's been this plateau for a really long time. So the 8-year itch, age is a huge factor. What if I could wave a magic wand and tell you one secret that we could lower the divorce rate in this country to about 18%? Doesn't that sound wonderful? I mean, it's already 30%. Maybe you still think that's high. So what if we could lower it to 18%? That sounds pretty good. Right now, everyone wants to get married. What's the one thing we'd have to do? Hey, everyone's a tour. Everyone say hi, tour. I always say hi to the tours. I don't get any kickbacks for that. Yeah.
Is it getting married like March 25?
Age. That's all it is. Wait. That's all you have to do. Couples that get married for the first time, if both partners are over the age of 25, the divorce rate for those couples is only about 18 to 19%. So what's dragging us all down, these divorce rates, is the couples who get married, and it happens a lot, when they're 18, 19, maybe you know someone, I know a lot, I mean, it's a thing. I remember like graduating from high school, you come back 3 years later and half your class is married. Holy shit. Anyone know what the divorce rate is when you get married for the first time between the ages of 18 and 22? It's not good, but 65%. In other words, it's pretty high. So age is important. What do these couples say when they're going through the divorce process? And they're actually not lying at all. Yeah. Yeah. I changed. He changed. We used to fit. Now we don't fit. But they're not lying. They don't anymore. They did change. I hope you are not qualitatively the same person when you're 25 that you were when you're 18. It's possible. Maybe you were some uber mature 18-year-old. That is possible. It's just unlikely. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's just you go through experiences and you figure out who you are and what you want to be and what you want to do. When you're younger, you're just not there yet. And hopefully the person you're connected with, maybe they're going to jive with you when you're 26 and 27, but there's a real shot that you're not going to fit anymore. And you thought you would, and now it's just not working. So age is important. And these last two are just sort of a couple fun facts, and then we'll get out of here because you've got 2 minutes. This will be quick. Who files first, the man or the woman? Almost always the woman. The woman's always the one to file first, and she usually is planning this for about 2 years. I told you, anytime my family's a walking statistic, I'll share you the story. I'll never forget my wife. We were over at her dad's house. Her dad had been married a couple times. And his current wife, they're now divorced, I remember sitting around the table, and we kind of had an idea that things weren't going so well. And I was talking, her name's Gina, I was talking to Gina, and it's like, what are you up to? She's like, oh, I went back to nursing school. And I knew it. Right then, why is she going back to nursing school? Because she wants out of this marriage. And she knows it's going to take about a year or so. And she's going back to nursing school. When she's out of this marriage, she can get a job and live on her own. And sure enough, it's exactly what we wanted to do. So we know from talking to divorced couples, the woman almost always files first. And when there's been like a 2-year waiting period. In other words, the average wife has known for about 2 years that this is something that they're going to do. It's not like a spontaneous, like, we're getting divorced and that's it. But this is the fun thing that I'll leave you with. So when we ask couples what happened, right? So now we're talking to, and I know we're being stereotypical here with men and women, but when we ask couples what happened, what is the most common thing women say went wrong in their marriage? Like, why? So you got divorced 3 years ago, yeah? Why? What was it? You could boil it down to one thing. Yeah. Communication issues, that's what they said. I know that's general, but in essence, that's what they're saying. Communication. He just wouldn't listen. I tried to get him to listen. He wouldn't. He never talked. Whatever it is. But communication issue. The fun part, though, is when we ask the husband, what's the most, it doesn't mean it's the only answer, and I know we got to get out of here. What is the most common answer that husbands say? Yeah. I don't know. I'll find that endlessly funny. So on the one end, we have wives saying communication issues. On the other end, we have a bunch of husbands saying, I don't know. Which is probably why their partners were planning for 2 years to get out of this marriage, because they honestly don't know. Even though they probably were told about 6,800 times. They're just not listening. All right, so that's it. If you have any questions, I'm going to end my little stream here. There we go.